Welcome to Lotus Tale Studios. I hope this story brings a smile to your face and warmth to your heart. If you enjoy it, please take a moment to like this video, drop a comment below, and most importantly, subscribe to Lotus Tale Studios so you never miss a new story. Your support means everything and keeps these tales coming. My name is Wei Rouwan. I am the fifth princess of Liang Kingdom, and I am, by every official account, completely useless. Liang Kingdom sits tucked against the southwestern border of the Qin Empire like a small stone lodged in the corner of a great courtyard. We have been a vassal state for so long that most people in Qin have forgotten we exist at all. My father, King Wei Changping, deals with this by insisting we call our country Great Liang, as though slapping a grand name on something small and fragile could make it so. He worries constantly that Emperor Xiaozhan will one day look at his map, notice our little patch of land, and simply absorb us the way a river swallows a puddle. 3 neighboring kingdoms larger than ours had already vanished into Qin's territory, reduced to mere counties, their royal families resettled and their flags taken down. Our entire military could not defend all 4 borders at once. Our grain stores were never quite full enough. Our court argued more than it governed. After many sleepless nights and much dramatic sighing, my brilliantly wise father slapped both palms on the table and announced his solution. Among all strategies, he declared, the beauty trap was the most reliable. And so he looked around at his daughters, landed on me, and decided I was the one to send. Before I left, I heard every rumor there was to hear about Xiaozhan. People said he was frugal, disciplined, and governed the empire with extraordinary competence. The Qin people had never lived better. Harvests were good, roads were maintained, trade was flourishing. The one great flaw everyone whispered about was his attitude toward the women of his harem. Beautiful women entered the palace and were never quite seen again in the same form. Whether they died of illness, or grief, or something nobody dared name directly, the result was the same. The harem had grown quieter and quieter over the years. The journey to Qin was long and rattling and made my back ache. By the time our carriages passed through the outer gates of the imperial palace, I had already dozed off twice and was on my way to a third nap. My attending Mama Fang shook me urgently by the shoulder, her voice pitched low with panic. Your Highness. We are about to meet His Majesty. Please, for the love of all ancestors, open your eyes. I sat up straight and blinked. My eyes refused to cooperate. They only opened fully when a hand touched my face. Cool fingers, unhurried and precise, tracing slowly across my cheekbone as though reading something written there in a language only he could see. I looked up and found Xiaozhan standing before me, tall and still in dark robes embroidered with silver at the collar, his whole bearing carrying the particular quiet of someone who had never once needed to raise his voice to make a room fall silent. He looked like a person carved from winter itself, beautiful and completely untouchable. Very sleepy, he said. It was not quite a question. Not anymore, I answered honestly, because his hand was very cold and had done what Mama Fang's panicked shaking had failed to do. He did not smile, exactly. But something in his expression shifted, just fractionally. His fingers slid down from my cheek, circled around to the back of my neck, and came to rest at my nape. Not pressing. Just resting. As though reminding me that the distance between a gesture of comfort and a gesture of threat was entirely a matter of his choice. Not afraid of me, he said. Should I be? I asked, which in retrospect was perhaps not the most diplomatic opening line. I could kill you, he said, with the same mild tone one might use to remark on the weather. I considered this. Then Your Majesty is welcome to proceed. I have never had any particular talents. But I have always had a calm heart. I made my peace with the likely outcome of this journey before I ever boarded the carriage. He looked at me for a long time. Then he laughed. It was short and genuine and seemed to surprise him slightly. You are not worth the trouble of doing it myself, he said. I extended my hand toward him helpfully. Will Your Majesty be having someone else do it, then? He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached forward, not to take my offered hand, but to untie the travel knot on my outer robe, his movements casual. Since Liang has gone to the trouble of sending you, it would be rude not to show some hospitality. His fingers were cold enough that I shivered head to toe when they grazed my shoulder. He stopped and looked at me. Scared now? Cold, I corrected. He was quiet for another moment. Then, with the same calm he had carried the entire time, he shifted to one side, drew me down against the cushions, and settled beside me. His arm rested across my waist, loose and unhurried. Sleep, he said. I thought about this. I pulled a blanket up over myself, then, after a moment's consideration, pulled it over him too. Then I closed my eyes. Xiao Zhan was cool to the touch, but his body was warm once you were close enough. By the time I drifted properly to sleep, I had rolled almost entirely into his side without meaning to. In my half-dreaming mind, he felt like a very elegant, very expensive furnace. When I woke the next morning, the space beside me was empty. A palace attendant with bright, excited eyes informed me that His Majesty had bestowed upon me the title of noble consort. I blinked. And the women who came before me? The attendant's smile flickered just slightly. They were not granted titles, my lady. You should not think too much about it. I nodded slowly. I understood. They had not lived long enough to receive one. Being given a title before whatever fate awaited me was at least something. It meant Liang's gesture had not gone entirely unacknowledged. I supposed I should feel proud on my country's behalf. I wondered when Xiao Zhan planned to make his next move. As it turned out, he was very busy. After that first night of sleeping in the same bed as a complete stranger in a cold and unfamiliar palace, he did not appear in the harem for half a month. The palace attendants, who had been scrambling to flatter me when they thought I was favored, quietly cooled in their attention once it became clear I was simply sitting in an empty hall growing vegetables. Xiao Zhan had given me the plum blossom quarters, a set of palace halls that had clearly not been used in some time. Weeds had taken over the courtyard. There was a large empty plot of earth beside the eastern wall that nobody had bothered to plant anything in. I looked at it for 3 days, growing increasingly impatient with the palace kitchen's bland and expensive food, before I called over the 2 attendants who still seemed genuinely willing to help me and told them to get a hoe. My personal maidservant Xiao Bai stood watching this process with the expression of someone who was not entirely sure if she had made a terrible mistake pledging her loyalty to me. My lady, she said carefully, watching the attendants break ground on my future vegetable garden, are you not troubled that His Majesty has not visited? I crouched down and inspected the soil quality with one finger. Should I be? It has been 15 days. I stood and brushed the dirt from my hands. Back in Liang, my father sometimes ignored his favorite consort for a month at a time and she still outlived 3 of the others. Absence is not necessarily a death sentence, Xiao Bai. Hand me those seeds. She handed me the small cloth bag I had tucked into my travel bundle, the one containing the vegetable seeds I had brought from home out of pure habit. Back in Liang, when the kitchen reduced my portions for weeks at a time because nobody remembered I existed, I had learned to grow my own. It was either that or go hungry, and I had always found hunger to be a very unpleasant motivator. I sowed the seeds in neat rows, told the attendants to water them morning and evening, and went back inside feeling considerably more settled. Xiao Zhan appeared exactly 1 month after my arrival, which is to say he appeared while I was crouched in the middle of my vegetable plot in an old working robe, happily pressing my fingers around a cluster of tiny green sprouts that had just pushed through the soil. I became aware of him because a pair of boots with gold thread detailing appeared at the edge of my vegetable bed. I looked up. He was standing with his hands loosely clasped behind him, backlit by the afternoon sun, expression unreadable. I heard, he said, that you want to raise chickens. I straightened up and wiped my hands on my robe. The kitchen food does not suit me. I thought eggs would be useful. You have been here a month, he said, and in that time your solution to dissatisfaction with the imperial kitchen was to start a farm. It seemed more practical than complaining. Something flickered behind his eyes. He looked at the vegetable sprouts, then at me, then at the attendants hovering nervously nearby. Why did you not come to me? I blinked at him. You have been managing an empire. I assumed you had more important things to think about than whether the 5th princess of a vassal state was happy with her dinner. In Liang, he said, his voice dropping a fraction colder, your princess was made to grow her own food. I thought about how to answer this. My father has 8 daughters. Having one who tends a garden is not remarkable enough to mention. Xiao Zhan turned to the head kitchen official who had apparently trailed behind him at a respectful distance. His voice went very flat and even. The kitchen has been sending inadequate meals to the Plum Blossom quarters for 1 month. You will go and explain that to the appropriate overseer. The official went pale. Xiao Zhan's gaze moved back to me, and I could see him watching my face carefully. I hesitated. He noticed immediately. You want to say something? I am only wondering what punishment is planned, I said honestly. Since you asked. The surrounding attendants seemed to stop breathing. I continued, calmly. The kitchen staff could come here and help me tend the garden. I have been short-handed. That seems more useful than a punishment. Xiao Zhan said nothing for a long moment. He just looked at me. Then he made a small gesture to the official, who bowed deeply and retreated. He did not confirm or deny what had been decided. But 3 days later, 2 kitchen workers appeared at my courtyard gate with hose and a slightly bewildered air, and nobody said anything further about punishment. Xiao Bai exhaled for what seemed like the first time in a week. She pulled me aside that evening and in a trembling whisper told me about the women who had come before me. How Xiao Zhan had asked each of them how they wished to punish servants who had displeased them. Those who begged for mercy had not survived. Those who ordered punishments had been made to watch, and the experience had broken them entirely. And there I had been, suggesting the kitchen staff join my gardening team. I listened to all of this while watching one of the newly assigned kitchen workers scatter grain for my chickens, which Xiao Zhan had also arranged to be delivered without commentary, a small wooden coop appearing in my courtyard one morning alongside a plump golden hen. I had no name for the hen yet. She seemed like she was still deciding her personality. Spring turned to early summer. My bok choy grew lush and tall, tender leaves catching the morning light in a way I found genuinely satisfying. Xiao Bai stood beside me one afternoon shaking her head with the quiet resignation of someone who had accepted her fate. My lady, she said, the kitchen chefs are now sending 7-course meals daily and competing to earn your favor. You have fresh seasonal fruit delivered every morning. His Majesty has not set foot in the harem for an entire month. People outside are saying all sorts of things. Let them say. I was pulling up a weed near the base of my largest bok choy plant. They are saying you are a fox spirit who bewitched the emperor. Very flattering. I moved on to the next weed. They are saying your monopoly over the harem is a national crisis. Even more flattering. I stood, brushed my knees, and turned toward the chicken coop. Xiao Bai, do you hear that? She paused. Hear what? The hen. She is cackling. I grabbed Xiao Bai's sleeve and started pulling her toward the coop. Come on, she has laid something. We found 2 eggs, still warm, nestled in the corner of the coop. The hen herself was enormously displeased about us taking them and chased us in a circle around the courtyard, clucking with furious indignation. Xiao Bai, who spent most of her days worrying about imperial politics, found herself running in circles and laughing against her will. I clutched the eggs to my chest in triumph. What on earth are you going to do with 2 eggs? Xiao Bai called, flushed and out of breath. I considered. Make soup. And bring it to the imperial study. She stopped running. My lady. I know what you are thinking. Do you? You are thinking this is how I fight for favor. I tucked the eggs carefully into my sleeve. I have seen enough of my father's harem to know how it works. I am simply too lazy to do it elegantly. 2 eggs, a pot of soup. That is the extent of my strategy. I made the egg soup myself in the small side kitchen off my courtyard. It was, by any honest assessment, extremely simple. Clear broth, 2 eggs, a pinch of salt. Xiao Bai, unable to stand watching me walk into the imperial study with only this, snuck 2 plates of Osmanthus cakes into the food box when she thought I was not looking and whispered instructions for me to say I made them. I nodded agreeably. When I arrived at the study and Xiao Zhan looked up from his papers at me, I set the food box down, opened it, and announced with complete honesty that the soup was mine and the cakes were from the kitchen. Xiao Bai, standing behind me, buried her face in her hands. Xiao Zhan's eyes moved from me to the soup to the cakes and back. He propped his chin in one hand. Why make soup yourself? My hen laid those eggs this morning, I said. She is technically your hen, since you arranged for her. It seemed right to give the eggs back to you. He showed no particular expression. His gaze rested on the bowl. After a moment, I noticed him glancing at the Osmanthus cakes, and had a sudden thought. If the soup does not appeal, please eat the cakes instead, I said quickly. You have been working long hours. You need proper nourishment. His finger tapped the desk once, lightly. If the goal is nourishment, how would cakes serve better than soup? I thought about this. He had a point. While I was still working out whether his logic was actually sound, he had already picked up the spoon and finished the entire bowl of soup with the calm efficiency of someone who had simply decided the debate was over. He set the spoon down. Decent cooking, he said. I am promoting you to empress. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Thank you, Your Majesty. Wait. But he had already pushed the plate of Osmanthus cakes across the desk toward me. I am full. Eat these. So I sat beside him and ate an entire plate of Osmanthus cakes while he watched me with an expression that was not quite there and not quite gone. When I picked up the last piece and hesitated, I glanced at him. Would Your Majesty like to try one? You said you were nourishing yourself. I do not like sweet things, he said. I relaxed and put the cake in my mouth. Before I had finished chewing, he leaned forward, took my chin between two fingers, and kissed me. It was brief, unhurried, and tasted of egg soup mixed with Osmanthus cake, which was a combination I would not personally recommend. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with something between amusement and satisfaction. Sweet, he said. I stared at him. Your Majesty, that is a deeply strange thing to do. He looked unbothered. You may go. I went, feeling that something had shifted in a way I had not fully processed yet. The imperial edict promoting me to empress arrived 3 days later. Xiao Bai held it in both hands and looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. My lady, she whispered. Was there something in that soup? I took the edict from her with the careful expression of someone handling something unexpectedly hot. You stood beside me and watched me make it from start to finish. 2 eggs and some broth. If that is enough to bewitch an emperor, Liang's fortune tellers have been measuring the wrong things all along. The real reason, as I understood it later, had less to do with any supernatural quality of my cooking and more to do with timing. A very persistent official had submitted a memorial that very day requesting that the emperor fill the harem with new consorts from the kingdoms that had recently been subdued. Xiao Zhan, having just spent the afternoon being given soup by the one woman currently in his harem, had apparently decided to resolve the question with a single brushstroke. If everyone was so concerned about who would be empress, then here she was. Problem solved. Go away. The new arrivals came shortly afterward regardless. 2 of them, both elaborately dressed and carefully composed. Standing before them as empress for the first time, I felt a headache beginning somewhere behind my left eye. I had wanted to grow vegetables and raise chickens in peace. Nobody had consulted me about managing a harem. Xiao Zhan used my vegetable plot and chicken coop as leverage. He stood in my courtyard with the expression of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and informed me that if I did not take up the role of empress properly, he would have the garden cleared and the chickens relocated. I looked at my bok choy. I looked at the hen, who had recently been named Xiaohong, after Xiao Bai pointed out that unnamed chickens were harder to mourn. I gritted my teeth, put on my full empress regalia, and went to conduct morning greetings. By evening I was exhausted and my neck hurt from the weight of the hairpins. I sat in my quarters letting Xiao Bai massage my shoulders while complaining bitterly. Do the powerful nations always make their empress accessories this heavy? Back in Liang they were half the weight. Xiao Bai, who was delighted by this entire turn of events, smiled with barely contained glee. My lady, this is befitting the empress's status. No matter what those new consorts try, your position cannot be shaken. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Consort Mai's expression this morning was not very pleasant. She is probably difficult. And consort you, the quiet one, those types are always more calculating. Still waters and all that. I rubbed my temples. Have you fed Xiaohong tonight? Xiao Bai blinked, then quickly stood up. Right away, my lady. Peace returned. I was almost asleep when Xiao Zhan came. He said nothing, simply wrapped an arm around my waist and lay down beside me with the air of a man who had already decided this was where he was sleeping and was not interested in discussing it. After a moment, he turned his face into my neck and inhaled. Then he said, "Chem." I was half asleep. What? Unfamiliar scent. I thought about it. I met the two new consorts this morning. Consort, you was wearing something rather strong. I must have picked it up. He was quiet. Then he sat up and said, in a tone that brooked no argument, "Go wash your hair." I looked at him. I already bathed. Your hair. His expression was calm, but there was something beneath it that suggested this was not negotiable. Otherwise, he added, with the particular casualness of someone who had carefully constructed the sentence in advance, "I will take you to bathe myself." I was out of bed and heading to the washing room before the sentence was fully finished. I had no interest in testing what that meant. My hair was still damp when I came back, and I was already fighting sleep standing upright. Xiao Zhan, who had apparently been monitoring the entire process, sat against the headboard and simply said, "Come here." I thought very briefly about dignity. Then I gave it up, climbed into his arms, propped my chin on his chest, and went to sleep. I dimly heard him call for a towel. I was already gone before anyone brought it. In the morning, Xiao Bai informed me that His Majesty had excused me from morning greetings and quietly sent word to Consort Yu that she was not to visit the Plum Blossom quarters without good reason. I nearly cried from relief. Consort Yu's name was Lin Ziyue. She was the youngest surviving princess of Yang Kingdom, which Qin had conquered some years ago. Her elder brother Lin Zhaoyang had also survived, having been clever enough to make himself useful to the military administration after Yang fell. He had since worked his way up to a considerable rank. The two of them were, by all accounts, devoted to each other and extraordinarily resilient. Ziyue had the kind of beauty that belonged in a painting. Delicate, composed, eyes that carried the weight of someone who had survived things she was not prepared to discuss. She sent me 3 invitations to visit her quarters before I gave in and went, mostly because Xiao Bai had been buzzing in my ear about demonstrating imperial authority until I could not think clearly. I brought a plate of Osmanthus cakes. Ziyue rose to greet me with a flowing courtesy that made every movement look like the opening line of a poem. "Empress, 10,000 blessings. I have long hoped for the chance to speak with you properly." Her voice had the liquid softness of someone who had been trained since birth in the art of being exactly as disarming as she chose to be. I sat down and pushed the Osmanthus cakes in her direction. "Made in my kitchen. Try some." She took one, ate it in small precise bites, and watched me eat 4 more consecutively. Something behind her eyes shifted into what might have been genuine surprise. "I did not expect the Empress to have such a healthy appetite," she said. "Food should not be wasted," I said, reaching for the 5th. "We drank tea." She asked, eventually, whether I happened to know what Xiao Zhan preferred to eat. She said she hoped to prepare something personally for him as a gesture of respect. I thought about it. "Probably egg soup," I said. She paused with her teacup halfway to her lips. That evening, Xiao Zhan arrived at my quarters, tilted his face toward my hair, and said immediately, "You went to see Consort Yu. You already know everything," I observed. He turned to the attendants. "Prepare a bath for the Empress." When I emerged with damp hair, he sat me down in front of him, took a towel, and dried my hair himself with the same calm efficiency he brought to everything. I ended up leaning back against his chest without particularly deciding to, and found I did not mind. "Does your Majesty dislike Consort Yu's fragrance because of a memory?" I asked, after a comfortable silence. He said, which was not a yes or a no. "Then I will not ask." I settled more comfortably against him. "If your Majesty plans to visit, I will bathe before you arrive to save everyone the inconvenience." The motion of the towel paused. "There is no need," he said, somewhat more quietly than before. "And I would prefer you not visit Consort Yu further." I considered this. We are both in the same palace. Avoiding her entirely is rather impractical. His eyes went a shade darker. "Then visit her less." I glanced up at him. His expression was still composed, but there was something in the set of his jaw that made me reconsider pushing further. "As your Majesty wishes," I said, looking back down. He seemed to exhale without moving. After a moment, His hand moved back to my hair. From that point on, he began sleeping at the plum blossom quarters every night. He did not explain this. He simply arrived, settled himself, and expected me to be there. I stayed close partly because I had no desire to come back smelling of someone else's incense and be sent to wash my hair at midnight again. Partly, if I was honest with myself, because I had grown accustomed to the particular warmth of sleeping beside him. He was like a very dignified, very complex furnace, and early summer nights were still cool. Summer arrived fully. Court officials began submitting memorials expressing concern that the emperor had no heir. The language was always respectful, always framed as loyalty and duty, but Xiaobai's intelligence network, which mostly consisted of listening at doorways and befriending other maidservants, told me the real complaint. His Majesty spent all his time in the plum blossom quarters. The other consorts were being ignored. The fifth princess of a vassal state was, apparently, ruining the empire's future. I ordered the kitchen to make steamed fish for dinner and did not think further about it. "My lady," Xiaobai said, looking pained. "Are you truly not worried? About what? About your position. About the future. About. No storm at court has ever managed to blow its way through this courtyard gate," I said, pulling a fish bone from my portion with careful attention. "And if the day comes when it does, I will deal with it then. Worrying in advance about disasters that have not arrived is simply doing the disaster's work for it. Eat your dinner, Xiaobai." She sighed the sigh of someone who had genuinely tried their best. That evening, Xiao Zhan arrived earlier than usual, stopped at the sight of the dinner table, and looked at the remains of the steamed fish. "I will not be staying tonight," he said. His voice was careful and very even. "I plan to visit Consort Yu." I set down my chopsticks. "Of course. She has been here 2 months already. That is appropriate." I nodded and said nothing further. He looked at me with an expression I could not read, something between displeasure and the specific frustration of someone who was not getting the response they had planned for. Then he turned and left. That night I lay in bed with my arms around a pillow and felt, quite distinctly, that something was missing. It was like reaching for something that should have been on the bedside table and finding it gone. Inconvenient and strangely disproportionate. In the morning, Xiaobai reported that His Majesty had been in a terrible mood at morning court. Servants had been fleeing corridors ahead of him all day. She looked at me with enormous expectation. "The bok choy needs 1 more week before harvest," I said. She made a noise of pure exasperation. The bok choy was harvested, eaten over 3 days, and mourned briefly. With no more seeds to plant, the vegetable plot sat empty and the rhythm of my days lost a small but meaningful pleasure. Xiaohong the hen, pushed too hard for eggs in my restlessness, pecked Xiaobai on the hand hard enough to draw a dot of blood. I was bandaging it when Xiaobai, wincing, said tentatively, "My lady. We could send for more seeds." I looked up. Then I pressed both hands to her cheeks and beamed at her. "Xiaobai. You are a genius. Why are you worrying about palace intrigue when you have a gift for agricultural logistics?" She rubbed her hand and tried not to look pleased. Xiao Zhan had been spending evenings at Consort Yu's quarters. Xiaobai reported this regularly in the hushed, urgent tone of someone delivering battlefield dispatches. I listened, nodded, and ordered the seeds. The seeds arrived. I planted them. Xiaohong laid 3 eggs in 1 week and I was very proud of her. Then Xiaohong was killed. A cat did it. A stray that had apparently wandered into the palace grounds through some gap in the outer wall, lean and suspicious and very pregnant, with yellow-green eyes that dared anyone to approach the hen it had very decisively claimed. The young attendants managed to catch it in a cage, but it sat in the corner of the cage with its claws tucked under and its gaze tracking every movement in the courtyard, issuing low threats at anyone who came near. I crouched in front of the cage and looked at it for a long time. Xiaobai appeared at my shoulder. "My lady," she said, in the voice of someone who already knew the answer. "Are you going to keep it?" "Xiaohong died in its mouth," I said. "A life for a life. Whatever remains of this creature's life belongs to me now." The cat's yellow-green eyes met mine. It hissed, once, then looked away. "It is also pregnant," Xiaobai said. "All the more reason," I said. "Those kittens owe me too." Xiaobai buried her face in her hands. The mystery of the cat's owner was solved 2 days later when Consort Mai came rushing into my courtyard without waiting to be announced. Consort Mai's full name was Bai Mingmai, a princess of Chen Kingdom, which had surrendered to Qin before any battle was fought. Her family was comfortable in Chen County. She had been sent to the palace by a father who wanted to stay in Xiao Zhan's good books, and she had apparently been grieving the loss of her cat since the day it disappeared. "Gua," she cried, throwing herself at the cage. "You are here, you terrible creature. I have been looking everywhere." I watched her. "Consort Mai," I said pleasantly, "your cat owes me a hen." Mingmai turned with a look of pure alarm. "A hen? Xiaohong. My most beloved companion. She died in your cat's mouth yesterday morning." Mingmai repeated the name with audible confusion. I kept my expression mournful. Xiao Bai, who had been nearby, heroically explained the situation and the depth of feeling involved. Mingmai, to her credit, did not try to dismiss it. She thought carefully, then straightened her shoulders with resolution. "When Gua's kittens are old enough, I will give you one. As compensation." Looking at her reluctant but genuinely sincere face, I felt the headache that had accompanied all my harem management duties for the past weeks begin to ease slightly. "You could simply find me another hen," I suggested. She shook her head firmly. "No. Gua must take responsibility for what she did." I looked at her. Then I nodded. "All right. Deal." When Gua gave birth 3 weeks later, there was only one survivor among the kittens. A round, disheveled little creature with black and grey patchy fur that stuck out in every direction as though it had been assembled in some haste by someone working from a poor description. Mingmai looked at it with the tender horror of a mother who loves her child regardless. "Whoever the father was," she muttered darkly, "he was absolutely worthless." I crouched and looked at the kitten carefully. It blinked at me with eyes that had not yet settled on a color. "It is quite interesting looking," I said honestly. "Distinctive. You are being very kind. I will call it Tuanzi," I decided. "Little dumpling." Mingmai looked at the kitten. "That is generous." From that point, Mingmai and I began visiting each other regularly. She talked more than anyone I had met in the palace, having previously directed all conversation at Gua, who was not much of a dialogue partner. She had a quality of spoiled cheerfulness that I found considerably easier to manage than Ziue's careful layers of elegant sorrow. Most importantly, when I brought Osmanthus cakes to our first proper meeting, Mingmai ate more of them than I did. That was the basis of a genuine friendship, as far as I was concerned. She had heard the same rumors about me that everyone had heard. Conniving. Ruthless. A fox spirit bewitching the emperor. She told me now, laughing, that she could not have been more wrong. "Actually," I said seriously, "the beautiful part is not wrong." She blinked. I explained about my mother. How she had been a woman of the Qin nobility, the youngest daughter of Marquis Shen, raised quietly in the countryside because of fragile health. How my father, then still a young prince making discreet visits to Qin's borders, had encountered her by accident when a road ambush left him badly wounded in the foothills. My mother had found him there, alone and bleeding in the rain, and had done what a person with a kind heart does. She had helped him. My father had called it love. My mother had called it an act of mercy that she very much wished she had thought through more carefully afterward. He had arranged for her to be taken back to Liang without her consent, after the ambush on the soldiers she'd thought were protecting her, and once she was inside Liang's palace walls there was no going back. She spent years there, quiet and deeply unhappy, and eventually died of an illness that everyone agreed came from a grief she had never been able to set down. "She was the most capable person I have ever known," I said, watching Tuanzi bat at Mingmei's sleeve. "She taught me to grow vegetables and identify herbs in the wild and weave grasshoppers from river reeds. I thought she was simply a very practical woman who had learned a great many rural skills. I did not know she had learned them because the countryside was where she had been happiest, before my father took that from her." Mingmai was quiet for a moment. "And your father, knowing all of this, still sent you here?" "He sees daughters as diplomatic tools," I said. This particular tool happened to be the one most likely to get the intended result, given the face I inherited. It is very efficient, from his perspective. Mingmei's expression said a number of things she was too polite to voice. Then she said, "Well, You are nothing like what they said about you. The beautiful part is still true, I reminded her. She laughed so hard Gua woke up from her nap. It was Mingmai who first told me, in a breathless sideways whisper, that the court was beginning to say Lin Zhaoyang was the real power behind Consort Yu's position in the palace. That the fragrance Ziyue wore was a family recipe with particular qualities. That Zhaoyang, having made himself indispensable to the military during the rebellion suppressions, was now a general of considerable influence. The Yang siblings, people were saying, had never truly accepted Yang's fall. I stroked Tuanz's increasingly fluffy head and thought about this. That night I could not sleep. This was unusual. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and eventually asked the question I had been avoiding. Xiao Bai. How long has it been since His Majesty came here? Xiao Bai looked up from the lamp she was trimming. Over a month, my lady. She paused. Are you unwell? Go away, I said, and lay back down. I was not unwell. I was irritated, which was different and more uncomfortable. At some point past midnight I became aware of warmth settling beside me where there had been cold empty space, and I startled badly. Who is there? You are jumpy tonight. Xiao Zhan's voice, dry and very familiar, came from directly above my head. I stared at the ceiling. Your Majesty climbed through the window. The door was attended by too many people. He sounded unbothered. You were at Consort Yu's quarters. Then why are you here? A pause. I could not sleep there. I thought about this with more feelings than I wanted to examine. He was warm against my back. His hand found my waist in the dark with the certainty of someone reaching for something they knew exactly where to find. You have lost weight, he said. The bok choy harvest is finished, I said. And Xiaohong is gone. I have been less active. He made a short sound that was almost a laugh. The life you lead, Rouwan. He rarely used my name like that. 2 syllables, said like they meant something more than their dictionary definition. I felt something in my chest shift in a way I decided not to examine too closely. Xiao Zhan, I said, using his name back, because it suddenly seemed unfair that it always went one way. You are too warm. I was almost asleep. He laughed then, properly, quiet and low, and pressed his face into the back of my neck. Go back to sleep. He stayed until nearly dawn and was gone before Xiao Bai opened the curtains. This became the pattern. He continued appearing at Consort Yu's quarters by day, maintaining whatever impression he was cultivating for whoever was watching. At night, past midnight, he came through my window, smelling of the cool outer courtyard air, and slept with his arm around my waist until the sky began to lighten. I stopped being able to fall asleep easily when he was not there. I refused to think about what that meant. The next time he appeared at my window, I sighed before he had fully settled. Xiao Zhan. You cannot be sleeping well this way. I sleep fine here, he said, pulling me back against him. You look thinner. So do you. I am not the emperor who has to run an empire. He was quiet a moment. If I told you to come to me instead of waiting, would you? I considered this genuinely. Are you asking me to wait in Consort Yu's courtyard like a piece of scenery? He made a sound that suggested he found this funnier than he was willing to show. I am asking if you would come to the main study. Under what pretense? Under the pretense of being empress. I thought about it. I would need to bring something. Showing up empty-handed is awkward. Bring another bowl of soup, he said, and I could hear the smile in it. It was 2 eggs last time and you promoted me to empress. If I bring a whole chicken you might give me your throne. He bit my shoulder lightly. Go to sleep. Xiao Bai, who had noted His Majesty's increasingly dark circles at morning court, whispered to me one afternoon that the whole palace was speculating about whether the empress was exhausting the emperor nightly. She asked if I had perhaps overdone it. I thought of Xiao Zhan arriving at midnight after spending his evenings maintaining a complicated deception at another woman's quarters, and running an empire during the days, and climbing through windows like a very dignified and slightly absurd thief. Probably, I said, and told her to tell the kitchen to send ginseng broth in the evenings. That night when he arrived, I relayed this information. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he pulled me under the blanket. I am excessively indulged, he said flatly. I did not say that. The kitchen staff implied it. The kitchen staff does not know what happens in this room. Apparently they have theories. Rouwan. Yes. He kissed me quiet, which was, I had come to understand, his preferred method of ending conversations that were going somewhere he had not planned. I was not particularly opposed to it. The summer stretched long and warm, and somehow despite everything, I was happy. Then he told me he would not be staying one evening, and went to Consort Yu's quarters, and that night I found out what the fragrance was. He came back before dawn, settled beside me, and after a moment said quietly, "The incense in Consort Yu's quarters has been modified." I was awake. I had been awake for a while. Modified how? It is an inducement fragrance. Long exposure affects judgment and creates attachment. I was quiet for a moment. How long have you known? Since the first night. He said it without particular emphasis. I detected the abnormality. I continued visiting to build a particular impression for particular people who were watching. I turned this over carefully. And you kept going there, knowing. The effect only works on extended, uninterrupted exposure. I never stayed past a certain point. And you never told me. He was quiet. Xiao Zhan, I said, very calmly. You let me think, for months, that you preferred her company. I needed you not to behave any differently than you already were. Because I was being watched as well. Yes. I sat up and looked at him in the dark. He looked back at me, and for once the composure seemed to be carrying a weight behind it. So when I ate my bok choy and worried about my chickens and did not throw any tantrums, I said, I was doing exactly what you needed me to do. Incidentally. Yes. That is deeply convenient for you. It was. I lay back down. I stared at the ceiling. He waited. All right, I said finally. That is all. What else would you like me to say? It has already happened. Consort Yu is a real person who has been given real false hope, which I think is unkind. And whatever you are building this chess game toward is clearly nearing its end. And I am very tired. I closed my eyes. Tell me one true thing. A pause. Then, quietly, I sleep better here than anywhere else I have ever been. I thought about that for a long time before I fell asleep. The memorial requesting Xiao Zhan fill the harem further arrived at court on a particularly humid morning. The subtext was clear enough. The empress was from a vassal state, of uncertain loyalty. Lin Zhaoyang was a decorated general of proven merit. The Yang siblings were the kind of story people liked to tell. Liang's princess grew vegetables. I heard all of this through Xiao Bai and Mingmei's combined intelligence networks and felt nothing very urgent about it. Mingmei, who had the emotional range of someone who had not yet learned to hide it, was furious on my behalf. They are comparing you to Consort Yu, she fumed, cuddling Gua with more intensity than the cat appreciated. As though surrendering early the way Chen did is something shameful. As though your family voluntarily sending a princess means you are less worthy than someone whose kingdom fought and lost. Tuanzi, who had been deposited in my lap, looked up at me. I scratched behind his mismatched ears. Let them say, I told Mingmei. People with nothing better to do always find something to talk about. And you genuinely do not care. I thought about Xiao Zhan climbing through my window at midnight, tired and thinner than he should be, pressing his face into my neck and going still. I care about things I have some ability to affect, I said. The rest I leave alone. Mingmei studied me with the expression of someone trying to decide if I was very wise or very strange. You are either the calmest person I have ever met, she said, or the most terrifying. Tuanzi headbutted my chin. He agrees with me, I said. A carrier pigeon arrived at my window one morning, tired and ruffled from a long journey. Tuanzi spotted it first and was instantly on the windowsill with hunting intentions I was barely fast enough to prevent. I extracted the bird from his reach, removed the message capsule from its leg, and unrolled the paper. It was from my father. He had written, in the careful cipher we had used for correspondence since I was small, a set of instructions. The recent assassination attempt on Xiao Zhan, which had been blamed publicly on Liang, had apparently convinced my father that now was the time to act. He urged me to coordinate from inside the palace. He believed, apparently, that I had spent these months cultivating exactly the kind of access needed to do what he was suggesting. I read it twice. Then I rolled it back up, tucked it into my sleeve, and went to the imperial study. Xiao Zhan was behind his desk. He looked up when I entered, and something in his expression shifted, very slightly, the way it always did when it was me. As though a calculation recalibrated. He had grown thinner. There were lines of exhaustion at the corners of his eyes that had not been there in spring. "Your Majesty," I said, setting the small scroll on his desk. "This arrived this morning." He picked it up, read it, and set it down. He said nothing for a moment. "The Empress simply brings this directly," he said. "I thought about burning it," I said honestly. "Then I thought about what you once said, about acting as though you already know everything. Which you usually do. So I concluded burning it would accomplish nothing except making me feel slightly better for approximately 3 minutes. He almost smiled. And bringing it seemed more efficient. He looked at me. Then he said, very quietly, "Rouwan, do you wish for my death?" I met his eyes. "No. If I destroyed Liang, your family." I said no. I held his gaze. "You have been good to me. In every way that matters, you have been good to me. That is not nothing." He stood and came around the desk, stopping in front of me, and lifted my chin with one hand. His eyes were unreadable in the way they always were when he was thinking something he was not ready to say yet. "And privately," he said softly, "in the place you do not say aloud." Something in his voice was different. Like a door left slightly open. "No," I said. "Not even there." He kissed me before I had finished the word. When he finally let me breathe, he was smiling with the specific satisfaction of someone who had just resolved a question that had been occupying them for a very long time. "Then I will live a very long time," he said. I touched my lips, which were slightly swollen. "That is very confident of you. I have an incentive now." I looked at him with a complicated feeling I was still working out the vocabulary for. "About consort you," I said. "What you did was unkind. She was using inducement incense on the emperor," he said. "I know. I still think it was unkind." I paused. "She shielded you at the banquet. That was not what it appeared to be." "I know that too." I sighed. "She still got stabbed. And she thought she was doing something meaningful." He was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "You are a more generous person than most." "I am a lazy person," I corrected. "Generosity takes effort. I simply cannot be bothered to hold grudges. They are too heavy to carry around." He laughed, properly and freely, the way he very rarely did. Then he told me to go back to my quarters. He had work to finish. I went, carrying the warmth of that laugh with me the whole way back. The announcement that I had been confirmed empress with full ceremonial recognition, rather than simply holding the title by edict, came 3 days later. Xiao Zhan issued it himself, bypassing the usual memorial process entirely. The officials who had been submitting concerns about the empty harem and the uncertain succession went very quiet. My third brother arrived at the palace 2 weeks after that. Wei Junmo was my closest sibling among my father's many children, the third prince, the one who had always been too honest and too kind to thrive in Liang's court politics. He was the one who had argued with my father when the fortune teller declared me a disaster spirit. He was the one who had stood beside me the day I left Liang, unable to say much but unwilling to not be there. He had also been the one who led Liang's desperate last military resistance against Qin, because even when the cause was already decided, he could not make himself surrender without at least trying. He walked into my receiving hall, travel-worn and thinner than I remembered, looked me up and down carefully, and then said, "Rouwan, you have put on weight." I burst out laughing. He joined me, and we laughed until Xiao Bai came to check if something was wrong. We ate a proper meal together before anything else. Junmo ate with the concentrated gratitude of someone who had been surviving on military rations and not much else for months. I had the kitchen send everything I thought he might like. He cleaned 3 bowls of rice and then sat back and looked at me with eyes that were still too bright. He told me how it had gone. The court at Liang had fractured immediately when Qin declared war, splitting between those who wanted to fight and those who wanted to negotiate. They argued for days while Qin's army moved. By the time consensus might have been reached, there was nothing left to reach it about. Junmo had gone to the front lines with the men willing to follow him and held Qin's advance for 7 days. Qin's general, Lin Zhaoyang himself, had apparently said afterward that under different circumstances he might have wished they had met as allies. Then my father had appeared in person at the front lines, walked out ahead of the army, and surrendered himself. Junmo had been standing in the middle of a battlefield soaked in blood and noise, and he had watched that happen. A kingdom like that, he said quietly, looking at the table. Rotten all the way to the root. Even if I had held them back this time, it would have happened again. And again. Under a ruler like him, there was no other way it could end. I did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say. The truth was too large and too sad for consolation. He patted the top of my head after a long silence. I ate too much. Walk with me. We walked to the imperial prison. Junmo knew where we were going without being told. Xiao Zhan had suggested this, through Junmo, apparently. My father was the one being held there. He looked older. He was wearing prison clothes and his hair was loose, which I had never seen before. When he saw me, his face went through several things in quick succession, and the first word out of his mouth was ungrateful daughter. A guard corrected him before he finished the sentence. In the dim light of the cell, my father recounted what I had never known. He had been young, still a prince, traveling in disguise through Qin's southern territories when a hired ambush left him bleeding in the foothills above a village. My mother had found him. She had been walking alone in the hills because she had loved the quiet, and because she was the Marquis's youngest daughter, raised in the countryside for her health, and she had never learned to fear being alone outdoors. She had helped him without knowing who he was. They had talked, over the days it took him to recover, about the hills and the plants and the small useful things that grew in unexpected places. My father said he had fallen in love with her in those days. He said it the way men always say such things when they want it to serve as justification. My mother had not shared those feelings. When he told her so, she was kind but clear. He had left. Then sent men back. Her guards had been removed and she had been carried, unconscious, into a carriage and across the border before anyone who loved her knew she was gone. My father, in the prison cell, said he had loved her. That he had never meant for things to be as they were. That her unhappiness had hurt him. I listened to all of this. Then I excused myself, stepped into the corridor, and threw up neatly into the waste bucket that the prison attendants kept there for exactly this kind of circumstance. Junmo held my hair back without comment. When I straightened up, I felt much clearer. We walked back out into the sunlight. I looked up at the sky for a moment, breathing. Did he tell you what he told me? I asked Junmo. Most of it. And Xiao Zhan knew. He has known for some time. Your mother's family, Junmo said carefully, has roots in Qin. Distant ones. He had it investigated. I thought about that. About Xiao Zhan knowing this whole time, deciding when I should know, and then sending my brother to make sure I heard it properly. Not from a court document. From someone who would stand beside me while I heard it. He is very calculated, I said. Yes, Junmo agreed. It is very annoying, I said. Yes, Junmo agreed, with slightly more feeling. We walked back. I found Xiao Zhan in the late afternoon in my garden, which he had started visiting occasionally, standing near the new seedlings with his hands behind his back. He looked at me when I came in. His eyes moved over my face with a precision that always made me feel slightly transparent. Thank you for sending Junmo with me, I said. He said nothing. And for the rest of it, I said. The parts you arranged without telling me. Some of it was useful. Some of it was presumptuous. I have not decided in what proportion yet. His mouth curved. Let me know when you decide. I sat down on the small stone step near the seedlings. My father, I said. What will happen? He will be executed, Xiao Zhan said, without dramatizing it. I nodded. I had expected that. The others? Your brother Junmo is being given administrative charge of the Liang territories. He has the capability and the temperament for it. The others will be resettled in border counties. Not harshly. I looked at the seedlings. New growth always had the same quality, hopeful and very small. And you have already decided all of this. I decided some time ago. Then why, I said, Did you ask me which I chose to be? Liang's princess or Qin's empress? In the study that day, when you made it sound like my answer would determine what happened to my family, he came and sat beside me on the step, which was slightly too small for two people. His shoulder pressed against mine. Because I wanted to know your answer, he said. I stared at him. That is extraordinarily unfair. Yes, he agreed, comfortably. You gave me a choice that was not a real choice. The outcome was already decided. The question was genuine. I thought about the distinction. It made a particular kind of sense that I found more irritating than I could easily explain. And my answer? You said you had already married me. He said it with a particular softness, like touching something he was careful with. That you were already half Qin. I was trying to survive the conversation. I know that too, he said. You survived it in the exact way that told me what I wanted to know. I looked at him. He looked back. His eyes were steady and deep and very direct when he was like this, stripped of the composure he wore in every other room. Xiao Zhan, I said. You are a very complicated person to live beside. I know. I am too lazy to deal with complicated people. I know that too. And yet, I said, and then could not find an ending for the sentence that did not sound like more than I was ready to say out loud. He reached over and tucked a loose piece of hair back behind my ear. And yet, he agreed, leaving it unfinished the same way I had. That night he stayed at the Plum Blossom quarters and did not pretend to go anywhere else. The night after was the same. The performance he had been maintaining for months quietly dissolved, and with it the careful choreography of midnight window climbing and incense and disappearances before dawn. Ziyue, having recovered from her injury, was moved to more comfortable quarters but restricted from court activities pending investigation. Her brother Lin Zhaoyang was recalled from his military posting under the pretense of a commendation. The investigation that followed was thorough and undramatic. The results were not surprising to anyone who had been paying close attention. Xiao Zhan handled all of it with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything. Watching him work was like watching someone finish a piece of embroidery they had been planning for a very long time, each thread placed exactly where it had always been intended to go. I stayed out of it. I planted a new row of seeds. Tuanzi, who had grown from a disheveled kitten into a disheveled adolescent cat with strong opinions about everything, supervised from the top of the garden wall. Mingmai came to help water the seedlings and we ate osmanthus cakes and watched Tuanzi stalk a butterfly with the deep seriousness of someone who had never failed at anything in his life and was not aware this was about to change. Are you not curious, Mingmai asked, about what is going to happen to them? I will find out when it is decided, I said. And you are not worried? About what part of it? She gestured vaguely at the palace in general. Mingmai, I said, I came here expecting to be dead within a season. Every good thing since then has been unexpected. I have a garden. I have a ridiculous cat. I have you, which I did not anticipate but am grateful for. Whatever happens next, I have already exceeded my original projections considerably. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, You are the strangest empress in the history of Qin. I am the only empress in the current history of Qin, I pointed out. So the comparison is limited. Tuanzi missed the butterfly and fell off the wall. He landed perfectly and walked away with great dignity, pretending nothing had happened. Mingmai and I laughed until we could not breathe. The night before the final judgment on the Yang siblings was pronounced, Ziyue sent a message asking to see me. I did not want to go. Xiao Zhan, who heard about it with the particular quality of someone who already knew, said I did not have to. Then he said, But she asked for you specifically. Not me. Something about the way he said it made me sigh. You are coming with me. You were just saying you did not want to go. I do not want to go alone, I clarified. That is different. She was composed when we arrived, sitting straight-backed in the dim quarters, looking like herself and nothing like the gentle weeping willow fragility she had worn all those months. Her eyes went to Xiao Zhan first, sharp and unflinching. You knew from the beginning, she said. Most of it, he answered. She looked at me then. Do you know what he is? A complicated person, I said. Sit down, consort you. Say what you need to say. She was quiet a moment. Then she told me what she knew, or believed she knew, about Xiaozhan's origins. That the prince who had been sent to Yang Kingdom as a diplomatic envoy all those years ago had not come back the same person he left as. That the young man who had returned bearing his name and his face had not been entirely the same young man. I listened carefully. Then I said, "Is he a eunuch, in your account?" She blinked. "Yes. The attendant who accompanied the prince would have been." I thought about several months of accumulated personal evidence. "He is definitively not a eunuch," I said. Ziyue stared at me for a very long moment. Then something in her expression crumbled slightly, and she laughed, once, short and helpless and genuine. "No wonder," she said quietly. "I thought the fragrance was not working because of his background. So that was not it at all." "No," I agreed. She was quiet again, looking at the floor. "The prince who went to Yang," she said finally. "He was kind to people who did not deserve kindness. My people killed him. And the one who came back, pretending to be him, took his revenge over 20 years very carefully and very thoroughly, and I could not stop it." She looked up. "How do you stay beside someone like that?" I thought about midnight windows and cold hands that were always warm by morning. About soup made from 2 eggs and a question asked genuinely in an imperial study. About hands drying wet hair in the dark. "He is trying," I said. "That is more than most people manage." She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded, once. As though I had answered a question she had not quite asked directly. We left. Outside, Xiaozhan walked beside me in silence for a moment before saying, "You could have said nothing." I know. She was not going to be persuaded of anything useful. I was not trying to persuade her of anything. I glanced at him. I was answering an honest question. People deserve honest answers, even at the end of things. He looked at me sideways. "Even your father?" I was quiet for a moment. "He did not ask me any honest questions," I said. "He only made excuses. Those I have no obligation to answer." Xiaozhan nodded once. His hand found mine in the dark and held it, and we walked back to my quarters that way without either of us commenting on it. The autumn hunt was Xiaozhan's suggestion, which meant it was an instruction delivered in the form of a suggestion. Mingmai refused to come on the grounds that Gua had recently produced another round of kittens and could not be left. I suspected she also had Xiao Bai's intelligence about what had happened on previous imperial hunts and had decided the odds were not in her favor. I could not entirely blame her. Ziyue came. She was still a consort in name, the investigation ongoing, and her attendance was expected. She and I greeted each other the morning of departure with the particular civility of 2 people who have had one honest conversation and decided that will have to be enough. The autumn forest was extraordinary. Colors that painters in Liang had always told me did not exist in real life turned out to simply exist further north. Orange and deep red and yellow that caught the sun and threw it back in a completely different form. The air was cold and clean and smelled of pine and fallen leaves. Xiaozhan let me ride with him. I had already warned him that I had no idea how to manage a horse alone, and he had accepted this information without surprise. The horse moved slowly at first, finding the path through the undergrowth. Xiaozhan's arms were on either side of me, holding the reins, and he was saying something quiet near my ear about the line of the hills in this part of the forest, which direction the deer tended to move in autumn, the particular quality of the morning light that meant the ground ahead was damp. I was mostly paying attention to the scenery and not planning anything, which meant that when the first arrow came I had absolutely no context for what was happening. The horse screamed. Everything went sideways. Xiaozhan pulled the reins with one hand and wrapped the other arm around me so hard I lost my breath, and the horse was galloping and arrows were coming from somewhere in the trees on both sides, a sound like sudden vicious rain, and his guards were shouting and moving and most of the noise was behind us because we had moved ahead of it somehow. I pressed my face into his chest and felt the impact of something against his shoulder, and then another, and he did not make a sound, just held the reins and held me and kept the horse running until the sounds fell away. The horse stumbled and stopped. We went down hard, rolling, Xiaozhan curling around me in the fall the way he must have practiced in some previous life, because it was too precise to be accidental. We came to rest in a hollow between 2 great roots, and it was quiet. Very quiet. I lifted my head. He was unconscious. There were arrow shafts in his back, 3 of them broken off short. His outer robe was black, which meant I could not see how much blood there was. I put my hands on his face, which was cold. Too cold. I was calling his name before I had decided to. No answer. I sat very still for one moment and felt something I had never quite felt before. Not fear, exactly. More like the specific terror of understanding that something enormous and irreplaceable was in danger of being gone. Then I moved. My mother had taught me things. Growing up in a palace where nobody noticed whether I was present or absent, I had spent a great deal of time outside, and my mother had used that time very thoroughly. I knew which plants grew near water. I knew which ones closed wounds. I knew that if you chewed the grey-green leaf that grew in clusters along the base of damp rocks and packed it into a deep wound, the bleeding slowed. I found the plants within 100 steps of where we had fallen. I will not pretend the arrows were easy to remove. They were not. My hands shook the entire time and I talked to him while I worked, which I had never done before, saying nothing useful, just talking. You enormous inconvenient person. I am pulling arrows out of you with my bare hands in a forest and you are not even awake to be grateful. The least you could do is groan. Something. I know you are in there. You climbed through my window in the middle of the night for months. You are not allowed to be stopped by a few arrows. He did not answer. I packed the wounds, bandaged them with strips torn from my underrobe, and pulled him into a seated position against the largest root. He was very heavy. I was sweating from effort and anxiety in equal measure. Then I sat beside him and waited. The forest grew dark. The temperature dropped the way it does in northern autumn, quickly and without warning. I had his outer robe wrapped around both of us and I was talking again, still saying nothing with any clear purpose, telling him about the autumn harvest I was planning for the garden, about Twan's recent development of a strong opinion about which side of the room he preferred to sleep on, about the Osmanthus cakes that the kitchen had recently improved the recipe for. At some point I said, I have not said any of the things I probably should say to you. I am aware of that. I do not generally say those kinds of things. My mother once told me that the people who matter know without being told, and the people who need to be told do not generally deserve it. I do not know if that philosophy holds up under field conditions. But if you wake up, I will consider revising it. The forest was very still around us. Rouwan, he said. I had not realized I was holding my breath until I released it. He sounded rough and very far away, but he was awake. His eyes were open, just barely. You talk an extraordinary amount, he said. You were not responding. I pressed my palm to his forehead. No fever yet. How do you feel? I have felt better. A pause. The arrows. Dealt with. By you. There was no one else. He was quiet for a moment, looking up at the trees above us. You could have left, he said. I told you once. If I was no longer emperor, I could no longer require anything of you. I looked at him. You are very stupid for someone so intelligent, I said. The corner of his mouth moved. Rouwan. I am serious. That is genuinely the most foolish thing you have said to me in the entire time I have known you, and you once told me you were promoting me to empress because of a bowl of soup. He laughed, low and careful because of the shoulder, but genuine. You did not answer. I should not have to answer that. I would like to hear it. I looked at him in the dark, this impossible, exhausting, carefully constructed person who climbed through windows and dried hair and asked questions in imperial prisons and had apparently been running a 20-year chess game with other people's lives, and who also somehow always knew exactly how I was sleeping and brought warmth into a room simply by being in it. I do not run, I said. I am too lazy to run. You know this. That is not an answer. Xiaozhan, I said. I stayed because it is you. Is that specific enough? He looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached up, wincing with the effort, and touched my face. His fingers were cold. Yes, he said. That is specific enough. We sat there until his guards found us, which took until the sky had fully darkened and torches were moving through the trees in the distance. He had, by then, recovered enough of his composure to be giving me precise directions for navigating back toward the main camp, which was typical. When the torchlight found us and the imperial physician came at a half-run, I stood up and stepped back and let them work. Xiao Zhan, being helped upright, turned his head and looked at me over the physician's shoulder. 2 rabbits, he said. I blinked. What? You mentioned once wanting 2 rabbits. 4 Mingmai and Xiao Bai. I stared at him. He had been shot with 3 arrows and dragged through a forest and had been unconscious for hours, and he was remembering a passing comment about rabbits. You are the strangest person I have ever met, I said. He smiled. I will get you the rabbits. He was right about the shoulder wound being the worst of it. By the time the imperial physicians had finished their examination the following morning, the verdict was that he needed rest, specific medicines, and to stop moving the shoulder for at least a week. He ignored most of this, which surprised no one. Investigations were already underway by sunrise. Mingmai, who had arrived at the hunt camp by fast carriage the moment she heard, found me outside the tent eating a bowl of kanji with the focused attention of someone who had not eaten properly since the previous morning. She sat beside me and did not say anything for a while, which was unusual for her and kind. The rabbits are the least of it, she said eventually. I know. He planned some of it. I set down the bowl. I know that too. And you are not angry. I thought about it honestly. He put himself in real danger, I said. Arrows in the back are not a comfortable deception. Whatever his larger plan was, the cost of it was real. I picked up the bowl again. Besides, he spent a long time not being sure of me. I spent a long time not being sure of myself. We are not so different in that regard. Mingmai looked at me sideways. You are much calmer about this than I would be. You have different feelings than I do, I said. I am not a good model for how anyone else should react to things. She thought about this. Then she said, what about consort you? The judgment had come down while I was in the tent that morning. Ziyue had been found responsible for a series of actions I will not detail, with her brother as primary architect. The verdict was serious. Zhaoyang bore the heavier consequence. Ziyue, in the end, was not executed. She was sent back to what remained of the Yang territories, stripped of her title, with a small household and enough to live on but not enough to be a danger. I thought about her in the Wind Pavilion that first day, looking like an ink painting, saying she had long hoped for the chance to know me better. I thought about her shielding Xiao Zhan's body at the palace banquet, which she had done because Zhaoyang told her to, as part of a plan she only half understood. I thought about her face in the dark of her final quarters, laughing that short helpless laugh when I told her Xiao Zhan was definitively not a eunuch. She made choices, I said. Some of them were her own, and some of them were made for her by someone she loved. That is a very human situation to be in. Mingmai was quiet. I hope, I said, that wherever she goes, it is somewhere she can be still for a while. The 2 rabbits arrived that afternoon, delivered in a small wooden hutch by an attendant with an expression suggesting he found the assignment unusual. Mingmai immediately named both of them without consulting me. I considered this fair, since they were technically for her. We returned to the capital a week later, Xiao Zhan moving with more care than his expression admitted to and insisting on reviewing court documents in the carriage the entire way back. I sat beside him and read when I wanted to and looked out at the passing countryside when I did not, and when he fell asleep between one county and the next I took the document out of his hand before it could crease and set it aside, and he woke near the capital gates and looked at me with a particular expression and said nothing. The rumors that followed were extraordinary in their creativity. The emperor had nearly died. The empress had saved his life with her bare hands. The empress was actually a spirit warrior disguised as a useless princess. Liang had planned the assassination. Liang had not planned the assassination. The Yang siblings had planned everything from the beginning. Xiao Zhan had known all along. Some of it was even true. The part people seemed most invested in was the empress sitting alone in a dark forest talking to an unconscious emperor for several hours. Various poetic accounts circulated. Several people who had not been present at all provided detailed descriptions of what I had said. Xiao Bai read me 3 separate versions and found all of them significantly more elegant than my actual experience. They say you told him the empire could not survive without him, she said. I told him about Tuanz's sleeping preferences, I said. She looked pained. I also told him, I said, that he needed to wake up. Eventually I think it worked. She sighed the sigh of someone whose mistress would never be the subject of a satisfying rumor. My lady. You really could have said something more memorable. I was pulling arrows out of someone, I said. Memorable was not the priority. Twansy, who had installed himself on my lap the moment I returned home, looked up at me with the absolute loyalty of a cat who has decided you are its person and intends to be inconvenient about it for the rest of its life. I scratched behind his mismatched ears. Outside, the capital was settling back into its rhythms. In the garden, the autumn seedlings were coming along. The hutch with Mingmei's rabbits sat in the corner of the courtyard, a new and slightly chaotic addition to the household. Xiao Zhan found me there at dusk, standing by the seedlings in the last of the light. He came and stood beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. The shoulder, I said. Better. The physicians said a week. It has nearly been a week. It has been 4 days. Close enough. I looked at him. He looked at the seedlings. The light was doing something interesting to the garden, turning the green very dark and the remaining warmth very gold. You owe me a conversation, I said. A real one. About the beginning. What you knew, and when, and why you kept it. I know. I am not in a hurry, I said. But I want it. When you are ready. He nodded. When I am ready. We stood there for a while in the quiet of the garden, the dusk deepening around us, Twansy weaving between our feet in figure eights with the determination of a creature who has decided 2 people are better than one. Rouwan, Xiao Zhan said. I did not think it would go like this. Like what? He was quiet for a moment. Like this, he said again, with a slightly different weight, gesturing at nothing in particular and everything in general. The garden. The cat. The hutch with the rabbits. The space between us that had stopped being empty somewhere along the way without either of us declaring it officially. I understood what he meant. I understood it better than I could easily say. Neither did I said honestly. He took my hand. His fingers were always cold at first, warming quickly. I had learned that a long time ago, in an unfamiliar bed in a strange palace, rolling toward warmth in my sleep without meaning to. We stood there until the garden went dark, and Xiao Bai appeared at the doorway to call us in for dinner, and Twansy finally gave up on the figure eights and sat on Xiao Zhan's boot with an air of permanent occupancy. I looked down at the cat. Then at the man. Then at the garden that had started as a weed patch and was now, somehow, exactly what I had needed it to be. Come on, I said. Dinner. And you are not reviewing any documents until after you eat. I have reports. After dinner, I said. He looked at me for a moment. Something in his expression went soft in the particular way it only ever did in this garden, in this light, when it was just us. After dinner, he agreed. We went in. And that, if you would like the ending in a single breath, is why Wei Rouwan, the most famously useless princess in all of Liang Kingdom, who could not write poetry or swing a sword and spent her imperial harem career growing vegetables and naming chickens, ended up as the one person the most powerful man in the known world could not sleep without. She never fought for favor. She never played a single long game. She was simply, thoroughly, stubbornly herself, and it turned out that for someone who had spent his entire life surrounded by performance and calculation, that was the most disarming thing in the world. She also makes very good egg soup, in case that was not already clear. Thank you so much for spending this time with Lotus Tale Studios. If this story made you smile, laugh, or feel something warm somewhere in your chest, please give this video a like, it truly helps more than you know. Leave a comment telling me your favorite moment, I read every single one. And if you have not already, please subscribe to Lotus Tale Studios so you never miss a new story. There are many more tales waiting, and I would love for you to be here for them. Until next time, take good care of yourselves. Goodbye for now.